Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us with short notice on this wild adventure, which I'm not entirely sure how it's going to work out with all of these different things, but we have faith. I came across this quote this morning, actually, when I was reading some of Joanna Macy, and I'm not sure why I was called today to share this, but I think it's hard for me actually to be here presenting to all of these people and not be able to feel you around me. So I thought maybe sharing a reading might be a way of us connecting. She says, "You don't need to do everything. Do what calls your heart. Effective action comes from love. It is unstoppable and it is enough." I think I wanted to share that because Judy's sitting in front of me, and she is someone that has been a guiding compass for me in following my heart in this work and seeing it as heart work. Before I hand over to Judy, I just wanted to invite you all to, if you can, take off your shoes. But if you can't, perhaps imagine your feet resting on the earth below you. And now they're resting there, I'm going to invite us all to take a collective breath together as a way of bringing us all into the same space. This breath, as we've got people from across Australia, across the world, friends in Norway, the States and New Zealand, I've seen you all pop up there. So I'm going to invite you to take a breath. So I'm going to take a breath in and a breath out. And with this, with your feet resting on the earth, I invite the question of reflecting on whose land your feet are resting on. Inviting the curiosity around the history, the story and the connection of the land. For me, my feet are currently resting on Bundjalung land. Bundjalung land is one of the 5 nations that make up the Kulin Nation. As I acknowledge the land and the Bundjalung people, I wish to also acknowledge the 500 plus nations that make up the unceded lands and waters across this country, and pay my deep respects and affirm my commitment to listening deeply and being a lifelong ally. So, Judy, I don't really know actually how to introduce you. So I think I'm just going to let it speak for yourself, but I do want to just highlight for those people who might not be familiar with Judy's work. Judy Atkinson is of Jiman, Bundjalung and Celtic German heritage. Did I say those right?
Yep.
Perfect. Judy has worked in the field of violence and trauma for the last 15 years. As a Professor of Indigenous Australian Studies at Southern Cross University, Judy hopes to build bridges between Indigenous healing practice and Western trauma recovery process. Judy's academic contributions to the understanding of trauma-related issues stemming from the violence of colonisation and healing and recovery of Indigenous peoples from such trauma has won her the Carrick Neville Bonner Award in 2006 and the Fritz Redlich Memorial Award for Human Rights and Mental Health from the Harvard University Program for Refugee Trauma. For those of you that haven't got this book in your collection, I strongly advise you. It was a complete game changer for me in my professional life and personal. Judy's book, Trauma Trails, Recreating Songlines, The Transgenerational Effects of Trauma in Indigenous Australia, provides context to the life stories of people who have been moved from their country in a process that has created trauma trails. Judy Atkinson is an expert in understanding intergenerational healing and recovery from trauma in Aboriginal peoples. Her approach to healing is deep listening. In order to heal the stories behind the trauma must be heard. Thank you so, so much, Judy, for joining us today. And I'm going to hand over to you because I'm already sick of my own voice and you are the person with all the wisdom.
Now, can you all hear me? Can you just wave if you can hear me, if I'm speaking loud enough? Yep, fine. So thank you for the recognition of country. I actually am sitting here on the Bundjalung land, the Aboriginal people, part of the greater Bundjalung nation. this is about walking country. It's about using our feet to find our humanness, and how we, in walking together, we heal together. So when Cook, and some of you may have heard me refer to this, and so I apologise because I open most of my talks with this. When Cook sailed up the coast of what we know now as Australia, he came to the easternmost tip and he called it Point Danger. And then he looked across and he saw this mountain peak and he called it Mount Warning. What he didn't know is from the easternmost tip of what we now call Australia, that he called Point Danger, up to the top of Mount Warning, which is in Bundjalung language, Wollumbin, were 130 ceremony sites, sites of significance. More particularly, if I was showing you a slide system, you'd see that Mount Warning is Wollumbin is the peak that comes out of a great volcanic rim. And part of the theme for today is how we walk country. So the senior men would take the young men up to the top of Wollumbin for ceremony to make them men. And then they had two things that they had to do to fulfill that journey. One was, for some of them, was stand around the volcanic rim and protect the women who were down in the rim, and that was the birthing site for women. Others of them left Bundjalung country, walked right across Western New South Wales, what is now New South Wales, into the tip of the Northern Territory into South Australia and down to the Great Australian Bight to pick up red ochre, particular red ochre, to bring it back to Bundjalung country. So a great, if people think we all lived in one little part of Australia, that was wrong. We lived all over Australia and there are walking tracks. And you were talking just a minute ago, Anna, about being in the Kimberley. Well, the shells from the Kimberley have been traded down to Victoria and the South Australian, Great Australian Bight. So clearly across this country we now call Australia is a massive, it's a big story place. I want to actually talk about why stories are so important. And I'm going to talk about it in relationship to modern science. So more recent research shows that we have brains in our head, right? So those of you who know anything about trauma will know that there's a lot of work that's been done in recent years about trauma, and what I would call the reptilian brain, the lower brain, the mammalian brain in here, and then the prefrontal lobes. The prefrontal lobes is our thinking place, the mammalian brain is our feeling place, and the reptilian brain is the fight, flight, freeze, the place of making decisions in a very quick way without thinking at all. So we're aware of all of that, we know that stuff, but I want to actually focus on something else in relationship to who we are. There's been some recent discussion about the heart brain. Okay, the heart brain is great because it actually pumps blood through our system, it keeps us alive. But there's some scientific discussions around how in this deep feeling place, we become more fully human in our connection to each other through our hearts. Not through our heads, but through our hearts, our feeling place. And then there's another group of people, scientists around the world, who are talking about the gut brain, what we put into our gut, and how the gut then chews up all of this great stuff we put into it, and it gives us energy, it creates the blood flow, and then it feeds our head. So we are, in a sense, human. But I want to talk about something else. When I was listening to some scientists talk about this in the United States, and I was down in Pablo country, I thought about another brain that I think we don't talk about enough, and that's the brain in our feet. So to start what I'm talking about, on the 18th September 1987, I was in Cape York. I was working with the Aboriginal Coordinating Council. We had 10 minutes at 10 o'clock that morning to decide on how we were going to spend $23 million of housing money. And we had no data, no stats, no nothing. But we still had, this was the games that the government played with us. After we had that meeting, and we made the decision, we allocated the money to the 14 Aboriginal reserves in Queensland. We had no information about how many people lived there, but we still allocated the money. And then just afterwards, an older lady came up to me. Her name was Judy Brumby, Auntie Judy Brumby, and she said, "Girlie, I need to talk to you." And I went, "Sure, Aunt, let's talk." And she said, "Last week, a little child of 5 was raped here, and nobody will do anything." Judy Brumby changed my life, because as she said that, my heart stopped for a moment. I became frozen. I couldn't walk. And I started to grasp, thinking, well, how can people do nothing about a child being raped? And I asked her then what she wanted me to do. And she said, "Can you help us to find out what we can do? Can we get the government to do something?" And so I went to my bosses, who were all Aboriginal men, and asked if I could look at this. And I did. And I found that more Aboriginal women had been beaten to death than the deaths in custody, but nobody was talking about this. And then when I went to the authorities, they just shrugged their shoulders. And I'm talking about the police and the health people. They just shrugged their shoulders and said, "It's cultural, isn't it?" And that was what changed my life, because I then went away to do my PhD, which resulted in Trauma Trails, which has now been used as a textbook across Australia. It also got me to start to ask some hard questions. So in thinking about what I've just said to you, this journeying, my feet brain, this is what I'm calling it, as a woman who thought she had to do research but never talk about things because I was shamed, the old men from up there took me aside and they said, "Okay, girlie, you're going to have to stand up and talk out. You're the one that's going to have to do this." And I said, "But how?" And they said, "Take your shoes off. Now, stand with your feet on the ground, on the earth, and imagine your feet, the energy of who you are is going deep into that soil, into the ground. And when you're ready, bring up that energy so it comes through your mouth, and you will be able to speak in any way you need to." And that's actually worked. I was at a conference once, and 2,500 people, and the machinery wouldn't work for me to do my presentation. So I kind of had my shoes off. I never talk with my shoes on when I'm in a conference. And I walked to the side of the stage while the technicians were trying to work out what to do. And I just kind of put my head up and I looked up as though I was visualizing our elders there. And I said, "Okay, if you think that I've got the capacity to give this talk to these people, without the help of my presentation, then I'll do it. But if you know I need that presentation, make it work." And as soon as I said that, the technician said, "It's working." So that was a lovely thing for me to understand, that sometimes you do need help from other people. So I'm talking again about this journey, the journey of the feet, the journey of walking across country. And we've all across the world done that in various ways. We've all been journeymen and women as we walk across country, sail across country. What I'm going to do now is tell you some stories to, I don't think I have to talk to you about the impacts of colonisation. I think that you, if you want, you can text me later on and I can send you some information. But I particularly want to now talk about children and what children have taught me. And what it is, children, the children in the most distress have taught me what it is to be human. I got a call just on 12 years ago from a lady who I knew about, but I had never really met in any deep way. And she asked if she could come and talk to me because she'd been asked to take over a school. Was a school for all of the kids who'd been kicked out of all of the other schools. They'd been suspended or expelled. Could she come and talk to me about what it would be like if she took over that? So I said, "Sure, let's come and sit down and talk." I didn't know at that time what powerful lessons I was going to learn. I had the theory of trauma. And so I want to talk about empathy. In trauma, and the scientific part of trauma, we don't talk about empathy, that connection from the heart to heart. Empathy is one of the key ingredients in creating a connection. And it often is explained as having three main parts. So it's the cognitive empathy that may come out of our brain functions, it's explained as the theory of the mind. This is our ability to understand the capacity of another person and how they're feeling too, just by using our mind to interact. It's a form of an intuitive mind reading, so to speak. An effective empathy is our ability to read another person's emotions. So now we're talking about the heart brain. When my heart stops for a moment, I'm reading the other person's emotions. When I see another person in distress, my heart also starts to beat up a little bit too. And I know that I've got to go and interact with that person, to sit with them. So the heart brain is the ability to feel, as opposed to feel with, as opposed to feel for. And that empathetic concern, sometimes referred to as a compassionate empathy, is our ability to experience what others have experienced and act on that. Now, the bottom brain is, the brain in the house is downstairs. There's downstairs and upstairs. I've talked about the two upstairs places, the brain in the heart, the brain in the head and the brain in the heart. More particularly from the children, I learned about being downstairs, the fight, flight, freeze, the automatic function, the breathing, the blinking, the capacity of the children to be in great distress and not have a memory of what's happened. So let me just talk about some of the children. Margaret Hayes is the principal I'm talking about. I've talked to her today about talking about some of our work. And when you started us to use our breath for a while, I said to her one day, how do you do this? So this is the story I want to share with you. There was a little fellow who came to school on the Monday. Fridays and Mondays are chaotic days because the drugs hit town on the weekend and the kids go berserk on the Friday afternoon because they know it's going to be chaotic on the weekend. And when they come to school on the Monday, they will act out, often without any cognition, what has happened. So this little fella had managed to steal a knife from a telecom fellas working from where they were working under the ground. He grabbed their knife, their big knife. And he came into the school racing around with this knife. And so the school had to go into lockdown. All the children had to be, and the teachers had to be in lockdown. And he was running around in a frenzy with this knife, wanting to cut and yelling out what he was going to do with this knife. And my good friend, Maggie Hayes, took a deep breath, just went into her calm place, and she walked out close to him, but not near him. And she didn't look at him. And she was calm and he was frenetic. And then she said very quietly to him, and I'll call him Billy, Billy, I always knew you were a ninja. I know you're a good ninja. Now can you throw that knife down into the ground and make it stand up for me? And for a moment he came out of his dissociated state. We're talking about trauma, the dissociated state of trauma. He didn't look at her, but he then pulled the arm back and he threw the knife and it stood up partly in the ground. Now, if it had been me, I'd have run over and grabbed the knife. But what she then did is she kind of turned slightly towards him and spoke to him again. And she said, yeah, you're a really good ninja, but I know you can do better. Can you go and pick up that knife and throw it again so it stands up properly? Because you're a very good ninja. And he walked over this time and he was coming back right out of his dissociation. He walked over, he picked up the knife. He then threw it into the ground again, but it still wasn't standing up as well as it could have been. And now she turned and she faced him. And she looked him in the face and she said to him, you know what? You are the best ninja I know, but I know you can do better. I want you to go and pick that knife up again and I want you to throw it. And when you finished, so he threw it, and he threw the knife this time, it stood up beautifully. And then she was looking at him and he was looking at her. She said, you are the best ninja I have ever met. Can you go and pick that knife up and bring it over to me now, please? And this little fella who was in a dissociated state from severe trauma from the weekend walked over, gave her the knife, and that was it. Now, the demonstration of that story is that if we'd have called the police or the fire brigade, they would have capsicum or pumpkin sprayed him. Capsicum sprayed him. But he gave her the knife willingly and did not lose face. So that to me is an important story of how we work with others. The children that I know, that I'm working with, come from early childhood where there's been massive pain in their lives. I'm talking about Aboriginal children growing up in this country we now call Australia. And how many of you have heard of, and you don't have to answer me, the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study of the United States? The 10 ACE questions focus on what I know most of these children have experienced: abuse, emotional, physical, and sexual; neglect, emotional and physical; household dysfunction, mother treated violently; household substance misuse; household mental illness; parental separation; incarcerated; household family member. 10. Just 10 questions. And those 10 questions will tell us how people are going to end up later in life with ill health, heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, things like that. This is research. I can send you the research if you want it. The children we are working with have between 8 and 10 yeses to those 10 questions. In the United States, when they did that study, they said if you've got 4, that is a substantial risk factor for diseases and strokes and other things. So 10. The women I worked with in Alice Springs Prison had between 9 and 10 answers to those questions. So I guess I'm telling you that beautiful story of Margaret Hayes having the child give her the knife to show you that we can actually, in our calm, meditative place, bring that calmness to another who is in a disassociated frenzy and bring that person back to being present. I want to tell a story now against myself. I like stories against me. I go out to this school a lot, and I'm going to spend 6 months in this school, and the Department of Education, New South Wales, is very keen to see what comes out of it. We're actually going to apply a trauma-specific program in this school with the teachers, with the students, and with the parents of the children, and then with the Aboriginal community generally, and then the workforce, the professional workforce in that place. In winter, it gets very cold. I mean, like very cold. So I walked out of the house to get in my car, and I could not see in the car. And when I got in the car, I couldn't see out of the car because of the ice on the car. I had to defrost so I could drive my car to the school. And I drove into the school, and there was a little fellow about 7 years of age walking into the schoolyard. And I remember sitting there and taking a deep breath and thinking, my goodness, they breed them tough here. He walked into the schoolyard with no shoes on, a flimsy little t-shirt that had holes in it, and a pair of dirty shorts, daggy shorts. My response was, they breed them tough here. The response of the other children in that school, and all of these children have been suspended or expelled from other schools for their bad behaviour. But the response of the other children in that school the next day was to bring warm clothing for him. Empathy. They saw a need and they responded. I mean, that stops my heart. It just is such a beautiful, and it also allows me to sit and look at myself and go, whoa, Judy, you need to take a deep breath and look more deeply at yourself, because you could have responded like those children responded. I have one final story that I want to talk about. When there's trauma in the life of children, they live generally in the downstairs brain, in the reptilian brain, the fight, flight, freeze. A young girl was brought to the school, and she mixed in with the other young girls who had been suspended or expelled from the other schools. She was 10 years of age. And the other children, the other girls, started to bully her because she was new, she was different. And it was coming on Mother's Day, so Margaret Hayes decided that she would have all of the children in the school draw cards for their mothers for Mother's Day. But she knew that this was not the appropriate thing to do for this young girl, because this young girl had just seen her mother killed in a domestic. This young girl didn't have a mother to do a card for. So she got permission from the authorities to take the young girl out to the cemetery with a bunch of flowers for her mother's grave, the first time she'd been out to the cemetery since her mother had been buried. And then she contacted the families of all of the other girls and asked permission for them to come with her. And this was a profound experience for those girls. They had no idea that this young girl had just lost her mother. So they sat around the grave together, they put the flowers, they talked together. And from that day, those other young girls in that school started to look out for, protect and care for the young one, and I'll call her Judy, knowing that she didn't have a mother. They made sure that she was safe, to the extent that when they realised that she didn't even have underwear, they petitioned for her to get some new clothing. It was just a really sad, I guess, situation. I want us to think about now the three stories I've shared, the deep bonding that this principal has built into this schooling environment. And I know that we're talking about early childhood, but every single one of the children I've worked with out there in that school are locked into a childhood of about 3 or 4 years of age. They might be 7, 8, 9, and 10, but their brain functions haven't improved because they're still locked into the pain and the trauma of that early childhood. You know, we can do such amazing things without even being aware of it, just by doing what comes naturally to us. I'm finishing by saying that when I was a young woman, I loved Pete Seeger's work. I loved Woody Guthrie's work. I loved Joan Baez. I loved that kind of music. It was beautiful. And so when I was having my children, my husband and I, our first date was to go to see Pete Seeger concerts. And when I was having my children, I used to sing all the Seeger songs to them. I didn't know that it had an effect until my youngest daughter had 2 children of her own. And they were just little tops, about 2 or 3 years of age. And she said to me, "Would you look after them, Mum?" And I said, "Well, what do I do if, they play up or something? What do I do?" And she said, "Oh, for goodness sake, Mum, you just sing them the songs that you sung to me. They know those songs. I sang them to them when they're inside me. And they remember the songs. So just sing those songs." And I tried it out of my children. And my children remember the songs and they sung them to their children when they were in utero. My point is that children, even in utero, experience trauma. They're the stories I wanted to share. I wanted to show that in each case, the children were amazing. But sometimes it takes a school principal to be calm. And other times it takes the school principal to know a story to introduce the other children about the sadness of that story. So all of this is part of who we are as humans and the journey that we're taking in our feet, walking this planet that we call home. Thank you.
Judy. Oh, thank you so much. Just a few things I wanted to share, I guess, in terms of a reflection as I wrap up. When you were speaking, I think what came to me was this, that we need each other, and we can save each other, and we can hear each other into being. Your face changed when you said, "Let me talk about some of the children's stories now." You just to see the smile across your face in terms of the love you have for children is so inspiring. And I think this quote of "the children in the most distress have taught me the most about what it means to be human" is one of the most powerful quotes I've heard in terms of trauma and working with children. So thank you so much. It links with the other work I've seen of yours around how you have this way of shifting children that are seen as mad and bad to children that are hurt, and that even newborn babies have a story for us to listen to and have a story to tell. So on that, I just wanted to thank you for bringing in the empathy, for bringing in the heart into this work. We hardly speak about that heart and that whole body connection, and what it just means to be ourselves in relationship with others, and that's actually the biggest tool of healing work. So empathy is the key ingredient to creating a connection in your words. And I just wanted to thank you so much. I'd love to have some sort of voice thing right now that sort of makes the crowd go wild so we can feel like we're in an audience, but I'm sure you can feel the love coming through. There's lots of people in the chat thanking you for your stories.
And there's one person who's asked if I have an email, and you're welcome to share the email with that person. Colin.
Okay. Colin, yeah, I've got his email, so I'll definitely connect you both.
Thank you. Yeah. No?
Thank you. And for everyone else that's joining us on this wild adventure, you've just heard from Judy Atkinson. Judy was our keynote today, and now we are going to follow the links that have been in the chat and that are in the program, so you can choose the session. And we'll join back into this room after that to hear from Martin Hoffman, the CEO, and Karim's Mojo Disco for our dance party. So thank you. And as someone's just said in the chat, Judy, we really felt that in our heart brain, and I couldn't agree more. So thank you.